My hands trembled as I opened the yellowed envelope, and inside was a rusted key resting on a slip of paper. The handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, as though the writer had gathered every last bit of strength just to form them. My darling girl, I've waited for you for 14 years now. I can't wait any longer. But there's something waiting for you in the barn. Don't let anyone take it before you get there. That was the first time anyone had ever called me my darling girl, and my grandmother had been dead for 3 months before I ever received that letter. I remember the taste of that morning. Instant oatmeal gone cold in a chipped plastic bowl, powdered milk that never quite dissolved right, leaving little white lumps on my spoon. The same breakfast I had eaten for the past 14 years at St. Catherine's Home for Children in Cleveland, Ohio. But that Tuesday in March was different. I knew it would be my last meal in this place. My name is Ren Ridgeway. Most people at St. Catherine's had never bothered to learn it. I was 21 years old, which meant the state of Ohio had officially run out of reasons to keep me. The foster care system doesn't believe in extended stays. Once you hit 21, you're out, ready or not. I wasn't ready. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the 2 duffel bags and 1 backpack that contained everything I owned in this world. 14 years of life packed into 3 bags. Some second-hand clothes worn thin at the elbows. A few books I had collected from library sales, their covers softened from too many rereadings. And 1 photograph of my parents that had grown soft and creased from too much handling over too many years. The photograph showed them young and smiling, standing in front of a white farmhouse I didn't recognize. My mother had dark hair like mine pulled back in a loose ponytail. My father had his arm around her waist, and they both looked so happy it almost hurt to look at them. They died when I was 7. A car accident on a rainy November night on a stretch of Ohio highway. I have never been able to drive past without holding my breath. One moment I had a family, a home, a life that made sense. The next moment I had nothing but that photograph and a social worker explaining that I would be going somewhere safe. Somewhere safe turned out to be a lot of places. Foster homes that didn't work out. Group facilities where no one else would take me. I learned early not to unpack completely, not to get too comfortable, not to expect anything to last. Mrs. Piton knocked on my door at exactly 9 o'clock. She was the social worker assigned to my case, a tired woman in her 50s, who had seen too many kids like me pass through her files. I didn't blame her for the weariness in her eyes. This job would wear anyone down. She gave me that sympathetic smile I had seen 1,000 times. The one that meant someone was about to deliver news they thought was bad, but had learned to package as opportunity. Ren, are you ready? There's a few things we need to go over before you leave. I nodded and followed her down the hallway one last time. Past the rooms of younger girls who weren't old enough yet to be pushed out into the world. Past the cafeteria where I had eaten thousands of forgettable meals. Past the common room where I had spent countless hours staring at a television I wasn't really watching. In her office, Mrs. Peton settled behind her desk and pulled out a folder with my name on it. After 14 years, my entire existence in the system had been reduced to that one thin folder. You have your identification documents, your birth certificate, your social security card. Yes, ma'am. And you understand the resources available to you, the transitional housing program, the job placement services. Yes, ma'am. She nodded, then paused. Her hand went to an envelope sitting separate from my file, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. She looked at me the way a person looks at a puzzle they weren't expecting to find on their desk. There's one more thing. This came for you last week, from a law office in Vermont. I nearly forgot about it with everything else going on. She handed me the envelope. It was thick, made of expensive cream-colored paper, with a return address from a firm called Waverly and Associates in Burlington, Vermont. I had never known anyone in Vermont. I had never known anyone who used paper this nice. I opened it carefully as if it might bite. Inside was a letter from an attorney named Cornelius Waverly, informing me that my maternal grandmother, Elspeth Ridgeway, had passed away 3 months earlier at the age of 79. I read the words twice before they made sense. My grandmother. I barely remembered her. There had been a few visits when I was very young before the accident. Blurry memories of a white farmhouse, of hands that smelled like wood shavings and beeswax, of a voice that called me little one. But after my parents died, nothing. The system had tried to contact her when I entered foster care. She had declined to take custody. Too old, they said. Lives too remotely, unable to care for a child. The rejection had burned for years. My own grandmother had not wanted me. I had family out there somewhere, someone connected to me by blood, and she had chosen to let me become a ward of the state rather than take me in. I had spent so many nights wondering why. What was wrong with me that even my own grandmother did not want me? Was I too difficult, too damaged? Was there something fundamentally unlovable about me that everyone could see but me? Eventually, I stopped wondering. I locked those questions away in a part of my heart I tried never to visit. It was easier to believe I had no one than to believe someone had chosen to abandon me. But according to this letter, my grandmother had left me something in her will. A farm in rural Vermont. 60 acres of land, a farmhouse, a barn, various outbuildings, and a savings account containing approximately $12,000. $12,000. I had $47 in my pocket. I had never in my life possessed more than a few hundred at once. 12,000 might as well have been 12 million. And a farm, 60 acres. I did not even know how big 60 acres was, but it sounded enormous. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a mistake. Mrs. Piton was watching me with undisguised curiosity. Everything all right? My grandmother died, I heard myself say. She left me a farm. The words sounded absurd coming out of my mouth, like I was reading lines from someone else's life. Girls like me did not inherit farms. Girls like me inherited nothing but bad luck and low expectations. A farm. Mrs. Piton leaned forward. In Vermont. That's what it says. She shook her head slowly. Ren, this could change everything for you. Could it? I was not sure I believed that. In my experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. There would be a catch. There was always a catch. But still, a farm. 60 acres. A farmhouse with my family name attached to it. And a grandmother who had rejected me 14 years ago but had apparently thought about me at the end. Why? Why leave me anything after all this time? If she did not want me when I was a scared 7-year-old who needed her, why did she want me to have her farm now? I called the number on the letterhead from a payphone outside St. Catherine's. My hands were still shaking as I dialed, and I had to try twice before I got the numbers right. Mr. Waverly answered on the third ring. His voice was warm and professional, the voice of someone who had spent decades delivering both good news and bad with equal measure of dignity. Miss Ridgeway, I've been hoping you'd call. I'm so sorry for your loss. My loss, as if I'd lost something, as if you could lose someone you never really had. Your grandmother was very specific in her instructions. She wanted you to have the farm when you turned 18 or aged out of the foster system, whichever came first. She also left a letter for you that I'm required to give you in person, along with some other items she wanted you to have. Why didn't she? I stopped myself. The question felt too big for a phone call, but Mr. Waverly seemed to understand. Your grandmother had her reasons for the choices she made. I think her letter will explain some things. When can you come to Burlington? When could I come? I had nowhere else to be. No job waiting. No apartment lined up. No life to return to. The transitional housing program had a waiting list 3 months long. As soon as I can get there. I used some of my precious $47 to buy a Greyhound bus ticket from Cleveland to Burlington. The trip would take nearly 12 hours with stops in places I had never heard of and would probably never see again. I boarded the bus with my 2 duffel bags and my backpack settling into a seat near the back where I could watch the world slide by through a scratched window. The other passengers were a mix of tired travelers and people who looked like they were running from something. I fit right in. As Ohio gave way to Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania to New York, I thought about my mother. Her name was Rosalind Ridgeway. She had grown up on that farm in Vermont. She had walked those 60 acres, lived in that farmhouse, known my grandmother in ways I never would. What had made her leave? The letter from Mr. Waverly had mentioned that she had been estranged from my grandmother for years before the accident. Why? What could drive a daughter away from her mother so completely? I pulled out the photograph of my parents and studied it again. That white farmhouse in the background. Was that the farm? Was I looking at the place I was about to inherit without even knowing it? My mother's face gave me no answers. She just smiled at the camera, young and beautiful and utterly unaware that she had less than a decade left to live. I fell asleep somewhere in New York, and I woke up as we crossed into Vermont. The landscape had changed while I slept. Rolling hills covered in the last stubborn patches of winter snow. White farmhouses with red barns. Stone walls that wound through fields like ancient rivers frozen in place. It looked like a postcard. It looked like a different world entirely from the flat gray streets of Cleveland I had left behind. Mr. Waverly's office was in a converted Victorian house in Burlington. The kind of place that held on to its original character, even behind a polished brass nameplate. He met me in the foyer, a man in his mid-60s with gray hair and kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He looked like the kind of grandfather I used to imagine having, back when I still let myself imagine such things. Miss Ridgeway, Ren, thank you for coming all this way. He led me to his office and settled me into a worn leather chair. Then he pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in unsteady script. Each letter formed with visible effort. She spent a long time on it toward the end, writing and rewriting until she got it right. He handed me the keys, the financial records, the property documents. The bank account showed a balance of $12,347.16. Then his expression grew serious. There's something else. Your grandmother was very specific about this. She said to trust a man named Thaddius Brennan completely. He's been looking after the property since her death, and she said to be careful, that not everyone who comes to you will have good intentions. She seemed concerned about protecting you from something. A chill ran through me. What had my grandmother been afraid of? I found a small diner near the bus station and ordered coffee I did not really want, just to have somewhere to sit. The vinyl booth creaked when I slid into it. The place smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee, and a few locals sat at the counter paying no attention to the girl with the duffel bags and the shell-shocked expression. I opened my grandmother's letter. My dearest girl. Not Ren, not Miss Ridgeway, my dearest girl. I imagine you're confused. Probably angry too. You have every right to those feelings. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. What I can offer you is an explanation, and I hope a chance at the life your mother would have wanted for you. The letter went on for pages. She explained everything. And with each word, the story I had told myself about my life began to crack apart. She and my mother had been estranged before the accident, a falling out that had festered for years over choices and stubbornness. My grandmother took the blame. Pride, she called it. The kind of pride that masquerades as principle until it's too late to tell the difference. When social services contacted her about taking me in, she had wanted desperately to say yes. But she was 65 years old, living alone on a remote farm with no support system. Her hands were beginning to shake in the mornings. Her hearing was starting to go. She had convinced herself it was selfless. I told myself you deserved better than an elderly grandmother in the middle of nowhere. I told myself the system would find you a good family. I was wrong. I was a coward. And I've spent every day since then regretting the choice I made. She could not take me in, but she had never stopped thinking about me. She had contacted social services regularly requesting updates. She had set aside money every year. She had planned obsessively for the day I would age out of the system. The farm is your inheritance. It's been in our family for 5 generations, and I want you to have it. Do with it as you wish. But if you want to keep it, everything you need to get started is waiting for you. And then the warning. There is something waiting for you in the barn, in the tack room at the back. It will explain everything else you need to know. But please, darling girl, be careful. There are people who might try to take what belongs to you now. Not everyone can be trusted. But Thaddius Brennan is a good man. He was my friend for 30 years. Trust him. The letter ended with words that blurred as my eyes filled. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be the grandmother you deserved. But I hope this farm can give you the foundation I failed to provide. I love you, Ren. I've always loved you. Even when I couldn't find the courage to show it. I sat in that diner for a long time. All those years of feeling unwanted. All those nights wondering what was wrong with me. And she had been thinking about me the whole time. It did not erase the loneliness, but something shifted inside me, like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. I called the number for Thaddius Brennan. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Brennan. Mr. Brennan, this is Ren Ridgeway, Elspeth's granddaughter. A pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer. Something almost broken underneath the gravel. Been wondering when I'd hear from you. Your grandma talked about you all the time. You know, especially toward the end. He cleared his throat. You need a ride out to the farm. It's about 45 minutes from Burlington. And I'm guessing you don't have a car. We arranged to meet the next morning. I spent that night in the cheapest motel I could find, lying awake and staring at a water-stained ceiling while my grandmother's letter replayed in my mind. Something waiting in the barn. People who might try to take what belongs to me. Trust Thaddius. Thaddius Brennan arrived at exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, driving a mud-spattered Ford pickup that looked like it had survived 30 Vermont winters. He was a tall man in his late 50s with weathered skin and hands the size of dinner plates. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky, the kind of eyes that had seen more than they cared to remember. He got out of the truck slowly and looked at me for a long moment before he spoke. You look just like her, your grandmother, same gray eyes. I had heard that before about my mother. But hearing it about my grandmother felt different, like a thread connecting me to someone I had tried so hard to forget. He shook my hand firmly. His grip was calloused and warm. Thad, just Thad, nobody's called me Mr. Brennan since I was on a fire crew, and that was a long time ago. We drove into the countryside. The roads getting narrower, the houses farther apart. Stone walls lined the fields, some looking so old they might have grown out of the earth itself. The sky was heavy with clouds that threatened late winter snow. But there was something beautiful about the bareness of the landscape. The way you could see for miles across the sleeping fields. Thad drove in silence for a while. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that men who have worked hard all their lives share with people they trust. Then he glanced over at me. Your grandmother loved for this land, said it was in her blood, same as breathing. But my mother left. He nodded slowly. His jaw tightened. She did, that nearly broke Elspeth's heart. He glanced at me again. Your mother's name was Rosalind Ridgeway, most beautiful girl in the county according to your grandma. Stubborn as a stone wall, just like Elspeth. That's usually what breaks families apart, you know. Not the differences, the sameness. He said it the way older men say hard truths, not to hurt you, just because someone has to. We turned onto a gravel driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, Ridgeway Family Farm, established 1892. 1892. Over 130 years of my family's history rooted in this one piece of land. The farmhouse came into view first. A classic New England structure, white clapboard with green shutters and a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on one side. The paint was peeling in places. A few windows had been boarded against the winter. But even in its current state, there was something solid about it. Something that spoke of endurance. Needs some work, Thad said. But the structure's sound. New roof 5 years ago. Furnace replaced last winter. Foundations as solid as the day it was laid. Your great-great-grandfather knew what he was doing. Behind the house stood a large red barn, its paint faded to a soft rust color. Several small outbuildings scattered around the property. and beyond them fields stretched toward the tree line. 60 acres. In the city you measured your space in square feet. Here it seemed to go on forever. Thad led me toward the barn. He walked with the deliberate gait of a man whose knees had been through something. He caught me looking. Old injury, Green Mountain fire in '88. Nothing I can't live with. He said it the way men his age say everything about their own pain. Small, matter of fact, not asking for anything. We reached the barn doors. Massive things made of thick oak weathered gray by a century of Vermont weather. Thad grabbed the iron handle and looked at me. Your grandmother wanted me to bring you here. Said this was the part that would matter most. He slid the doors open. What I saw inside stopped me dead. I had expected farming equipment, old hay bales, rusted tools, forgotten things. What I found instead took my breath away. The main area had been transformed into a workshop. Tools hung on pegboards along the walls, organized with obsessive precision. Wrenches by size, chisels by width, hand planes lined up like soldiers on parade. Workbenches ran the length of both sides, worn smooth from decades of use. Half-finished projects sat on stands, pieces of furniture in different stages of completion. But it was the back section that made my heart stop completely. A professional furniture-making studio, specialized saws, a Powermatic lathe, a drum sander big enough to lie down on. Finishing equipment lined against the wall, all of it expensive, all of it meticulously maintained. Shelves held different types of wood, each one labeled and stored with care. Vermont black walnut, cherry, white oak, sugar maple, woods I had only ever seen in furniture stores, never in their raw form. And along one wall stood at least a dozen completed pieces, tables and chairs and cabinets and decorative items, each one crafted with a level of skill that seemed impossible. The wood glowed with deep finishes. The joinery was so precise you could not see where one piece ended and another began. Your grandmother was one of the finest furniture makers in Vermont, Thad said quietly. Self-taught, started after your grandfather died as a way to cope. Turned out she had a real gift. I walked through the studio in a daze, running my fingers over the smooth surfaces. Each piece showed not just skill, but artistry, love. These were not just furniture. They were pieces of someone's soul made visible in wood. She sold to galleries and collectors all over New England. That's how she supported herself. That's where the money she left you came from. Every piece she had sold, every hour bent over her workbench, and the money had gone into an account waiting for me. I had not even known I had a home to come to. Thad led me to the tack room at the back of the barn. Inside was a desk, a filing cabinet, wooden boxes stacked neatly against the wall, journals labeled with dates and topics, 47 USB drives, each numbered and dated, business cards from galleries, a ledger showing 20 years of sales. My grandmother had built an entire business, an entire life, and she had left it all to me. At the bottom of the last box, I found a smaller wooden container, beautifully crafted with my name carved into the lid in elegant script. Ren. When I tried to open it, I discovered it was locked. No key in sight. And beneath my name carved into the wood, 3 more words. Open when ready. She worked on that box for months, Thad said. Wouldn't tell me what was inside. Just said it was the most important thing she had to give you, and that you'd find the key when you were meant to. That evening, Thad brought me to his house for dinner. His wife Delia was a warm, round-faced woman who pulled me into a hug like I was her own granddaughter the moment we met. She had prepared pot roast with root vegetables and fresh baked bread that filled her kitchen with a warmth I had not felt in 14 years. As we ate, Delia brought my grandmother to life in ways the letter and the barn never could. Elspeth was stubborn as stone, she said with obvious affection, but generous to her bones. When Thad broke his leg 6 years ago and couldn't work for 3 months, she hired him to do consulting on her furniture designs. Paid full wages just to sit in her barn and offer opinions. We all knew she didn't need help, but she found a way to support us without it feeling like charity. Thad nodded, staring down at his plate. He did not say anything, but his jaw worked the way a man's jaw works when he does not want to show what he is feeling. Delia leaned forward, her voice dropping. She talked about your mother, Rosalind, all the time. Kept a photo on her workbench. And after Rosalind died, she shook her head. Part of Elspeth died that day, too. Then Delia said something that made me set down my fork. Elspeth had some kind of trouble years back. Someone trying to take advantage of her. She never told us the details. But I remember her being scared, really scared. And Elspeth Ridgeway was not a woman who scared easy. Thad shot Delia a look across the table. Quick, almost sharp. Then he changed the subject, asking me about my plans for the farmhouse. But I caught it. That flash of warning between husband and wife. Thad was keeping something from me. That night, I stayed in their guest room. I should have been exhausted enough to sleep straight through morning. But something kept pulling me back to the window. The Brennan house sat on a hill about half a mile from my grandmother's property. From the guest room, I could just make out the silhouette of the red barn against the dark skyline. And at 2:30 in the morning, I saw something that made my blood go cold. A light moving inside the barn, a flashlight beam sweeping back and forth through the darkness, like someone was searching for something. Someone was in my grandmother's workshop, in the middle of the night. I stood at that window for 20 minutes, watching the light move, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to run over there, to confront whoever was trespassing on my property. But I was alone in a strange place with no phone, no weapon, and no idea what I was dealing with. The light disappeared around 3. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I told Thad I wanted to check on the barn before breakfast. He offered to come, but something told me to go alone first. The barn doors were still locked, exactly as we had left them. Nothing looked disturbed from the outside. But when I walked around to the side entrance, I found what I was looking for. Fresh boot prints, in the mud, large, heavy, pressed deep into the soft earth right up to the side door. Boot prints that had not been there yesterday. Someone had been here. Someone was looking for something. And I had a sick feeling I knew exactly what they were after. That afternoon, I met Corbin Whitfield while I was struggling to repair a collapsed section of fence in the front pasture. I heard someone call out from the road, "Need a hand with that?" I turned to see a young man walking up the driveway. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and brown hair that fell across his forehead. His clothes were practical and well-worn, and his boots were caked with the kind of mud you only get from working the land every day. "Corbin," he said, stopping a few feet away with an easy smile. "My family's farm is about 2 miles down the road." Heard Elspeth's granddaughter had finally arrived. "Ren," I said, shaking his offered hand. His grip was firm and calloused. "I know. Your grandmother talked about you often." He told me the story as we worked on the fence together. 6 years ago, his father had been thrown from a tractor at the start of planting season. Shattered his knee so badly the doctors were not sure he would ever walk right again. The family had no money for hired hands, and the fields would not plant themselves. Your grandmother drove over one morning with her truck loaded with seed. Corbin said, driving a fence post into the ground with 3 solid swings. Said she'd ordered too much for her own garden, and it would go to waste if we didn't take it. Then she just started planting. Came back the next day, and the day after that. Brought Thad and Delia too. They worked our fields for 3 weeks straight until Dad could get around on crutches. He shook his head. She never called it help. She called it being neighborly. But we would have lost that whole season without her. Before he left that afternoon, Corbin mentioned something that tightened the knot already forming in my stomach. "Someone's been asking about your grandmother's place?" he said, his easy manner shifting to something more guarded. "At the diner in town, man in a nice suit asking who inherited the Ridgeway property, what condition it was in, whether anyone was living there yet." He looked at me directly. "Just thought you should know." I found Sheriff Ellis Donovan in his office in town the next morning. He was a big man in his early 60s with a thick gray mustache and eyes that had watched over this county for 30 years. His office was in a small brick building between the hardware store and the diner. "So you're Elspeth's granddaughter," he said, looking at me over the top of his coffee mug. She talked about you every time I saw her in town. Never stopped hoping she'd see you again. I told him about the flashlight in the barn, the boot prints, the man in the suit asking questions. His expression darkened as I spoke. He set down his coffee slowly. Ren, I've known your grandmother for over 30 years. She was one of the first friends I made when I took this job. And I'm going to tell you something now that I want you to hear clearly. He leaned forward across his desk. There's a man in this county who's been hurting people for a long time. Waits until someone dies. Then shows up with paperwork claiming they owed him money. By the time the family figures out what's happening, he's already got them cornered. Who is he? His name is Victor Ashcroft. And if he hasn't come to you yet, he will soon. 3 days later, Victor Ashcroft found me. I was in the barn watching one of my grandmother's videos when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A black Cadillac Escalade had pulled up in front of the farmhouse. Expensive, spotless, the kind of vehicle you rarely saw on dirt roads in rural Vermont. The man who stepped out matched the car perfectly. Charcoal suit, polished shoes, graying hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome if it were not for the coldness in his eyes. His smile when he spotted me did not reach those eyes at all. "You must be Ren," he said, extending his hand. "Victor Ashcroft. I was a business associate of your grandmother's." I shook his hand because that is what you do. But my stomach tightened immediately. My grandmother's warning echoed. Not everyone who comes to you will have good intentions. "I don't think she ever mentioned you," I said carefully. His smile flickered before settling back into place. "We had a professional relationship, not personal. I'm in the furniture business. High-end pieces for discerning collectors. Your grandmother was one of my suppliers for many years." I did not respond. I had learned in the foster system that silence often gets you more information than questions. Victor Ashcroft looked around the property with an appraising eye, taking in the farmhouse. The barn, the field stretching toward the tree line. "Beautiful place. Must be worth quite a bit these days. Can I help you with something, Mr. Ashcroft?" The pretense of friendliness dropped from his face like a mask being removed. What remained underneath was harder, sharper, and entirely without warmth. "I'm afraid I have some unpleasant news." He pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Your grandmother and I had an agreement, a contract for a large commission she never completed. 10 custom pieces for a client in Boston. Due 6 months ago, she received a $20,000 advance for work she never delivered." He handed me the document. I scanned it, my heart sinking with every line. A formal contract dated 18 months ago. At the bottom, a signature, Elspeth R. Ridgeway, in handwriting that looked almost exactly like my grandmother's. "As you can see, your grandmother took a significant advance for work she never delivered. That debt falls to her estate, which means it falls to you. Sincere, $20,000. My grandmother had left me $12,000. Even if I emptied the entire account, I would still be $8,000 short. I don't have this kind of money. I understand completely." His voice dripped with false sympathy. "But I'm prepared to offer you a solution. I have contacts in real estate who would be very interested in this property. $50,000 for the farm, the buildings, everything. That covers your debt to me. And you walk away with $30,000 in your pocket. $50,000 for property worth at least $300,000. I might have grown up in the foster system, but I was not stupid. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Of course. But my patience has limits, 60 days. After that, I pursue legal action, courts, lawyers, depositions." He handed me a business card. "Think it over, Ren. I'll be in touch." He drove away, and I stood in the driveway clutching that contract, fear coiling tight in my stomach. I told Thad everything that evening. He listened without interrupting, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup, his blue eyes growing colder with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life. My father used to say something when I was a boy. He said any man who shows up with a contract before the door handle is cold has been hunting the corpse a long time. He looked at me across the kitchen table. Elspeth knew this man was coming, Ren. That's why she prepared everything the way she did. Whatever she left you in that locked box, that's your answer. That's your way out. He set down his coffee, and you're not going to face him alone. Not while I'm still standing. Outside, the Vermont night was settling in, cold, vast, full of stars I could not see through the farmhouse windows. But somewhere in that dark barn, in a locked wooden box carved with my name, my grandmother had left me the truth, and I was going to find it. The first 2 weeks at the farmhouse taught me how to be alone in a way I had never experienced before. At St. Catherine's, alone meant lying in your bed with 30 other girls sleeping in the same room. It meant sitting by yourself in a crowded cafeteria. It was loneliness with an audience. This was different. This was silence so complete I could hear the house breathing. The creak of old timbers settling in the cold. The whisper of wind against windows that had watched over this land for more than a century. The occasional call of an owl from the darkness outside, a sound I had never heard in Cleveland and now could not imagine living without. I moved through the farmhouse slowly at first, touching things carefully. My grandmother's coffee mug still sitting in the dish rack where she had left it. Her reading glasses on the arm of a worn leather chair. A half-finished piece of knitting in a basket by the fireplace. The house was a museum of a life interrupted. A life that had been waiting for me. I started watching my grandmother's videos on the laptop Thad had loaned me. Video number 1 was dated 15 years ago. My grandmother was younger in it, her hair more brown than silver, her hands steadier on the tools. She introduced herself to the camera with a self-conscious smile. "I'm not entirely sure why I'm doing this," she said. "Maybe because I'm getting old and I want someone to remember what I've learned. Maybe because I hope someday my granddaughter will watch these and know who I was, who I really was, underneath all the mistakes." My granddaughter. She had been thinking about me 15 years ago when I was just a child lost somewhere in the system. I watched video after video, taking notes, absorbing not just the techniques but the philosophy behind them. My grandmother believed furniture should be built to last generations. She believed in honest materials and honest work. She believed the things we create carry pieces of our souls into the future. "The wood will tell you what it wants to become," she said in one video, her gnarled fingers tracing the grain pattern in a piece of cherry wood. "You just have to learn how to listen." In the second week, I built my first piece. A simple side table, 4 legs and a flat top, following one of her beginner tutorials step by step. Nothing fancy. One leg was slightly shorter than the others. The finish was uneven where I had applied too much stain. But I had built it with my own hands. When I set it upright on the workshop floor, a warmth spread through my chest that I did not recognize at first. It took me a moment to name it. Pride. The dangerous, fragile kind that comes from making something real with your own hands. Sheriff Ellis Donovan came to see me the next morning. He drove up in his cruiser, took off his hat as he stepped out, and stood looking at the barn for a long moment before he spoke. "Your grandmother built that workshop with her own 2 hands, you know, after your grandfather passed. She didn't know a thing about carpentry when she started. Just taught herself from library books and pure stubbornness." He turned to me. "I've been watching Victor Ashcroft for 5 years, Ren. I haven't been able to build a case that would stick. Every time I get close, the evidence disappears. Witnesses stop returning my calls. Contracts show up looking perfectly legitimate." He paused. "But he's done this to 2 other families in this county. The Hendersons, the Morrisons. Both of them lost farms that had been in their families for generations. Both of them signed away their inheritance for pennies on the dollar because they didn't know how to fight." His eyes were hard now. "I need you to be careful, Ren, and I need you to tell me if you find anything at all, because I think your grandmother knew things about Victor Ashcroft that could put him away for a very long time." That afternoon, I began going through every drawer, every cabinet, every corner of the tack room, looking for something, anything. My grandmother's videos had told me she was a woman who prepared, a woman who left nothing to chance. If she knew Victor Ashcroft was coming, she had left me something to fight him with. I just had to find it. I worked for 3 days straight. reading through client lists, sales receipts, correspondence with galleries, bank statements going back 20 years. I read until my eyes burned and the words blurred together. On the fourth day, I found something I was not expecting at all. I was cleaning out the desk in the tack room, checking every drawer, when I noticed the bottom drawer seemed shallower than it should be. I pulled it out, completely running my fingers along the edges until I found a small notch hidden in the corner. I pressed it. A false bottom popped open with a soft click. Inside was a bundle of letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. At least 200 of them. My hands trembled as I pulled them out and looked at the first envelope. It was addressed to me. Ren Ridgeway, care of the Ohio Department of Child Services. I opened it with shaking fingers. My dearest Vren, today is your 8th birthday. I hope wherever you are, someone is giving you cake and making you feel special. I wish I could be there. I wish I could hold you and tell you how much your grandmother loves you. The letter described the farm in spring, the apple trees blooming white and pink, the sound of the creek in early morning. It was postmarked 14 years ago. I picked up another. My 9th birthday. Another for my 10th. Birthday after birthday. Year after year. There were letters for every birthday I had spent alone. Every Christmas when I had no family. Letters for the first day of school. For Easter. For random Tuesdays when she was just thinking about me. And every single envelope was stamped with the same words. Return to sender. Address unknown. Or worse, return to sender. Recipient refused. 247 letters. I sat on the floor of the tack room, surrounded by 14 years of my grandmother's love that had never reached me. And something inside me that had been holding together for a very long time finally shattered. All those nights believing I was forgotten. All those years thinking something was wrong with me. That I was fundamentally unlovable. And she had been writing to me every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary day when she missed me. She had tried to reach me 247 times, and every single letter had been sent back. I read them all over the next 3 days. In the early letters, she wrote about her guilt, her fears about being too old and sick to raise a grieving child. But she also wrote about her hope that I would find a good family. As the years passed, the letters grew more desperate. She had hired private investigators. She had found lawyers who promised to navigate the system. She had tracked down a school event and watched me play basketball from a distance too afraid to approach. I saw you today, one letter read. You were playing in the gymnasium. You're so tall now, so beautiful. You look just like Rosalind at your age. I wanted to run to you and hold you, but I was afraid. What if you didn't want to see me? What if I only caused you more pain? And in letter after letter, the same warning appeared. If Victor Ashcroft ever comes to you with a contract or a claim, don't believe a word. He's a liar and a thief. I have never done business with him, and I never will. There it was. My grandmother's own words, written years before her death, proving she would never have signed anything with Victor Ashcroft. Thad found me on the 3rd day still sitting on the floor of the tack room, surrounded by opened envelopes. He did not say anything for a long time. He just knelt down beside me, moving slowly on his damaged knees, and picked up one of the letters. He read it in silence. Then another. Then a third. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. She wrote every week for the first year. Then she started writing to social services, begging them to give her your address. They wouldn't do it, said it was against policy. She hired 3 different investigators over the years. None of them could find you. Someone in the system was blocking her. He set the letter down carefully, like it was a fragile thing. Your grandmother was the strongest woman I ever knew, Ren, and she wept for you every year on your birthday, every single year. I saw it with my own eyes. He looked at me directly. Elspeth didn't give up, and you don't get to either. Not now, not when you're this close. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to me. A plain white handkerchief, clean and pressed. The kind of thing men his age still carry. I did not know how to thank him, so I just took it. Corbin came by every day during that week, sometimes to help with fence repairs, sometimes just to sit with me in the workshop while I worked on my second piece of furniture. He did not ask about the letters. He did not push. He was just there. One afternoon, he brought a thermos of coffee and 2 mugs. We sat on the porch steps watching the light change over the fields. And he told me about his family. His father still recovering from the tractor accident. His mother, who ran the farm store. His younger sister, who had left for college and was studying to become a veterinarian. You're not alone here, Ren. You know that, right? Your grandmother wasn't just a neighbor to us. She was family. And that means you are too. I did not know what to say to that, so I just nodded and drank my coffee. 2 days later, a woman named Harriet Sloan arrived at the farm in a county vehicle with an official-looking clipboard. She was in her early 60s with steel-colored hair pulled tight against her scalp and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She introduced herself as the chairwoman of the town's code enforcement board and told me she was here for an emergency safety inspection of the barn workshop. Standard procedure when a property changes hands, she said. Her pen was already moving across the clipboard. We need to make sure all equipment meets current safety regulations, fire codes, electrical standards, structural integrity. She spent 2 hours examining every inch of the workshop, making notes with the kind of focus that felt less like diligence and more like hunting. When she finished, she handed me a yellow notice with a list of 12 supposed violations. I'm afraid the workshop doesn't meet code. Electrical wiring in the back section is outdated. Fire suppression system isn't up to standard. Several pieces of equipment need certified inspection before they can be operated. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means the workshop is hereby ordered to cease operations. You have 7 days to bring everything up to code, or the building will be sealed pending full remediation. No access allowed until compliance is verified. 7 days. If the workshop was sealed, I would lose access to everything. The tools, the wood, the finished pieces, and most importantly, all of my grandmother's records and evidence. Everything I needed to fight Victor Ashcroft would be locked behind a county seal. This seems sudden, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The workshop has been operating for decades. Harriet's smile did not waver. Regulations change, nothing personal. But it was personal. I was certain of it. Because that evening, Corbin came by and confirmed what I had suspected. Harriet Sloan and Victor Ashcroft. He said, his jaw tight. My father's been saying for years that they're connected. She helps him squeeze property owners with code violations and county regulations. Then he swoops in with his lowball offers once they're desperate enough to sell. It was not just one man trying to steal my farm. It was a system, a partnership, designed to crush people who had no money, no connections, and no way to fight back. People exactly like me. That night, Victor Ashcroft himself returned. He did not bother with the suit this time. He wore casual clothes, and his manner was stripped of all pretense. I heard about the inspection, he said, standing in my driveway with his arms crossed. Shame about the workshop. Those repairs will cost a fortune. You sent her. He did not deny it. I am a patient man, Ren, but my patience is running out. He gestured at the dark farmhouse, the sagging porch, the peeling paint. Look around you. This place is falling apart, and so is your little fantasy of keeping it. No court in Vermont is going to side with the girl who showed up 5 minutes ago over a man with signed contracts and real lawyers. He stepped closer. His voice dropped to something cold and intimate. Take the money, walk away, before this gets ugly. Get off my property. The words came out steady, even though my hands were shaking behind my back. Something ugly flickered in his eyes. 2 weeks, not 60 days, 2 weeks. And when this goes to court, don't say I didn't give you a chance. He left me standing in the dark, trembling with fear and fury in equal measure. That night, I nearly gave up. I sat alone in my grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by her things, her presence in every worn surface and faded curtain. And I thought about taking the money. $30,000. I could start over somewhere else. Some city where nobody knew me and nobody was trying to steal what little I had. My grandmother's letters sat on the table in front of me, and I read the last paragraph again. I hope you'll find your roots here, the way I once hoped your mother would find hers. Roots. I had spent my whole life without them. Moved from place to place, never staying long enough to grow into anything. And now that I finally had soil beneath me, finally had a place that was mine by blood and history, someone wanted to rip me out of the ground before I had even had a chance to take hold. I was not going to let that happen. The next morning I called Thad and told him everything. About Harriet Sloane, the code violations, the 2-week ultimatum. Thad was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Be at your barn at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning." At 7 o'clock the next morning, I walked outside to find 18 people standing in my driveway. Thad and Delia were there. Corbin and his father leaning on a cane but present. The woman who ran the hardware store. The couple from the farm 3 miles east. The pastor from the Methodist church. Faces I recognized from town. Faces I had seen only once or twice. And faces I had never seen before in my life. They came with toolboxes and ladders and rolls of electrical wire. They came with donated fire extinguishers and a new circuit breaker panel still in the box. They came with coffee and thermoses and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, prepared to stay all day. Thad walked up to me and put his weathered hand on my shoulder. "Your grandmother took care of this community for 40 years, he said. Helped people when they couldn't help themselves. Made furniture for the church, never charged a penny. Fixed the pastor's roof after the storm of '09. Planted the Whitfield fields when their father couldn't walk." He looked back at the crowd assembling tools and organizing supplies. Then he turned to me, and his voice dropped. Rough with something I had not heard in it before. "In '88 I was on a wildfire crew up in the Green Mountains. Big burn, bad one. I got caught between the fire and a ridge. Broke my back in 3 places getting out of it. Couldn't work for 8 months. Couldn't stand. Couldn't hardly feed myself. Delia and I had a baby on the way and nothing coming in." He paused. His pale blue eyes were wet at the corners. He did not wipe them. Elspeth showed up at my door with a casserole and an envelope of cash. Wouldn't tell me where the money came from. Just said a neighbor had left it for us. I found out 10 years later she'd sold a table she had been working on for 2 years. A masterpiece. Sold it below market to a collector in Boston just to have the money by Friday. She never told me. Never once mentioned it. And when I thanked her at her funeral... He stopped, cleared his throat. When I thanked her at her funeral, she couldn't hear me anymore. He looked at me steadily. "Now it's our turn to take care of hers. Nobody stands alone in this town, Ren. Nobody. Your grandmother made sure of that." They worked for 5 days straight. Electricians rewired the back section. Carpenters reinforced structural supports. Someone donated a commercial fire suppression system that met every code in the book. Corbin's father sat in a folding chair by the barn door directing traffic and telling stories, his cane leaning against his knee. By the 5th day, the workshop did not just meet code. It exceeded every standard Harriet Sloane could possibly throw at it. On the 6th day, Thad called the county inspector, a different one, and requested a formal re-inspection. The workshop passed with a perfect score. The cease operations order was lifted. Harriet Sloane's weapon had been turned to dust, and the whole community had shown me something I had never experienced before. What it felt like when people chose to stand beside you. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. But I still had Victor Ashcroft's deadline hanging over me. 9 days left, and I still had not found the concrete proof I needed to destroy his forged contract. On the 8th night, I sat alone in the barn and loaded the final video on my grandmother's list. Video 47, the last recording she ever made. She looked older in this one than in any of the others. Frailer. Her hands shook as she adjusted the camera, and her voice was rough with exhaustion. But her eyes were sharp, still alive with purpose, still full of the love that had driven her to make all these recordings. "Ren," she said, looking directly into the camera, "if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and you're trying to figure out what to do with everything I've left behind." She smiled. And even through the screen across time and death, it felt like she was smiling directly at me. "I don't know if you'll want to learn this craft. I don't know if you'll keep the farm or sell it. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. I just wanted you to know that you come from a line of makers and creators. Your great-great-grandfather built this barn with his own hands. Your grandfather made the stone walls that still stand on this property. Your mother was an incredible artist before she left Vermont. She paused. It's in your blood, Ren. This need to create something beautiful and lasting. Then she leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something urgent. Now listen carefully, because this is the most important thing I have to tell you. I leaned toward the screen. If anyone ever comes to you claiming I owed them money, claiming I signed a contract, don't believe it. There's a man named Victor Ashcroft who's been trying to cheat people in this area for years. He came to me once, tried to pressure me into signing papers. I threw him off my property. She reached off camera and held up a piece of paper. This is my signature, the real one. See this little mark under the E? It's barely visible unless you know to look for it. I've put that mark on every document I've signed since your grandfather died. Every single one. It's my way of making absolutely sure no one can forge my name. If anyone shows you a signature without this mark, you'll know it's a fake. I paused the video. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The mark under the E, a tiny line, almost invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. A secret that Victor Ashcroft could not possibly have known about. I grabbed the contract from where I had stored it in the desk drawer. Studied the signature. Elspeth R. Ridgeway. In handwriting that looked almost identical to my grandmother's. Almost, because there was no mark under the E. Nothing at all. The signature was a forgery. I hit play again. My grandmother was not finished. There's one more thing. The locked box I left you, the one with your name on it. The key is hidden somewhere only a true craftsman could find it. When you've learned enough to understand what I was trying to teach you, you'll know exactly where to look. The video ended. I sat in the dark barn, clutching the contract in one hand, thinking about keys and secrets and everything still ahead. I had proof the signature was forged, but I needed what was in that box. I needed the key. And to find it, I had to become the person my grandmother believed I could be. I stood up slowly, walked over to the workbench where the locked box sat waiting, ran my fingers over the carved letters of my name. Open when ready. Ready. I did not feel ready. I felt like a scared 21-year-old girl who had just discovered her whole life had been a lie. I felt like someone who was in over her head against enemies who had been playing this game for decades. But my grandmother had believed I could do this. She had spent 15 years preparing for the day I would stand in this barn with that box in front of me. She had believed in me before she ever knew me, loved me before I ever knew what love was. I owed her more than fear. I turned back to the piece of furniture I had built in my second week. The simple cherry side table with the slightly short leg and the uneven finish. It sat in the corner of the workshop where I had left it. Nothing to look at. But my grandmother had said the key was hidden somewhere only a true craftsman could find. And every video she had ever made had been building toward this. Teaching me, preparing me, somewhere in her lessons, somewhere in the work I had done with my own hands. She had left me the answer. I had 3 days to find it. Outside, the Vermont wind was picking up. Cold, sharp with the last teeth of a winter that did not want to let go. Somewhere in the darkness, Victor Ashcroft was sitting in a warm office counting the days until my deadline expired. Counting on the fact that a girl like me could not possibly outsmart a man like him. He did not know about the 247 letters. He did not know about the mark under the E. He did not know about the 18 people who had rebuilt my workshop in 5 days. And he did not know about my grandmother, the woman who had planned this fight for 8 years. The woman who had left me every weapon I would need. The woman who was still teaching me even now from beyond the grave. I walked back to the workbench and picked up the cherry side table. Somewhere inside its plain, imperfect wood was the key that would end everything. And I had 3 days to find it. It took me 3 more days to figure it out. 3 days of watching my grandmother's videos over and over. Practicing cuts and joints until my hands ached and sawdust coated every inch of my clothes. I was searching for something, a clue, a hint, some breadcrumb she had left to lead me to the answer. It came to me on the third night, at 2 in the morning, when I was too exhausted to think straight, and my mind had finally stopped trying so hard. I was sitting at the workbench, staring at the cherry side table I had built during my second week at the farm, my first real piece of furniture, following one of her beginner tutorials step by step, one leg slightly shorter than the others, finish uneven in places, nothing that would impress anyone. But I had built it with my own hands, following my grandmother's patient instructions. I had taken raw wood and shaped it into something real. I ran my fingers over the surface, feeling the grain beneath my calloused fingertips. And that is when I remembered. In video 23, my grandmother had demonstrated how to build this exact table. She had walked through every step, every cut, every joint. But at the very end, almost as an afterthought, she had added something that was not in the written tutorial. A modification, she called it. A secret compartment built into one of the legs, invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. Every piece of furniture should have a secret, she had said with a mischievous smile. Something only the maker knows about. It's like leaving a piece of yourself hidden inside the wood. I grabbed the table and flipped it over, examining each leg. They looked solid and identical, but I pressed on the inside of each one, feeling for the slight give that would indicate a hidden space. The third leg clicked. A small panel popped open, revealing a hollow space carved into the wood, and nestled in that space, wrapped in a piece of worn velvet, a tiny brass key. My hand shook as I picked it up. Such a small thing, to hold so much meaning. My grandmother had designed this test, knowing that only someone who truly learned her craft would find what she had hidden. She had trusted me to become that person. I carried the key to the tack room and knelt beside the locked box. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting. I turned it, heard the soft click, and lifted the lid. Inside I found 3 things. The first was a leather-bound journal, different from the others, labeled business records and important notes. I flipped through it until I found a page dated 8 years ago, and the words hit me like a physical blow. Victor Ashcroft came to the farm today, tried to pressure me into signing a contract for a commission I never agreed to. When I refused, he threatened to make trouble. I ordered him off my property and told him never to return. This man is a fraud and a con artist. I will never do business with him under any circumstances. Below the entry, she had taped a copy of the contract Ashcroft had tried to get her to sign. Unsigned, the same format, the same language, almost identical to the one he had given me. And beside it in red ink, 4 words. Keep this as evidence. He'll try again someday. If not with me, then with whoever inherits this place after I'm gone. She had known. She had known 8 years ago that he would come back, and she had prepared the evidence I would need to fight him. The second item was a manila envelope, thick with documents, bank statements going back decades, property records, a notarized letter from Mr. Waverly, dated 6 months before her death, certifying that Elspeth Ridgeway had never entered into any business arrangement with Victor Ashcroft or any of his known associates. But it was the third item that shattered me completely. A letter in different handwriting, younger, steadier, without the tremor of age. The envelope was addressed to Elspeth Ridgeway at the farm, and the return address was in Ohio. My mother's handwriting. I recognized it from the few cards that had survived my childhood, the ones I had carried through every foster home like talismans. The letter inside was dated 3 days before the accident. Dear Mom, it began. I had to stop and remember how to breathe. My mother had called her Mom, not Elspeth, not Mother, Mom, like a daughter who loved her mother despite everything. I've been trying to write this letter for months, but I could never find the right words. So I'm just going to say it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving the way I did. I'm sorry for the years of silence. I'm sorry for letting pride keep me away for so long. My vision blurred. I had to set the letter down twice just to breathe. David and I have been talking about what kind of life we want for Ren. And I keep thinking about the farm, about Vermont, About all the things I ran away from when I was too young and too angry to understand what I was leaving behind. I want Ren to know where she comes from. I want her to walk the fields the way I did as a girl, to learn about our family, to understand that she has roots, even if I tried to pretend I didn't. Were you planning to come visit this summer? I know it's been too long, and I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. I want to come home, Mom. I want to bring your granddaughter to meet you. I want to start over. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too stubborn to say it. I hope it's not too late. Your daughter, Rosalind. 3 days later, she was dead. They never made it to Vermont. I never got to walk those fields with my mother. Never got to meet my grandmother as a child. Never got to have the summer she was planning. But she had tried. At the very end, she had tried to come home. She had wanted me to know my grandmother, to have roots, to belong somewhere real. And my grandmother had kept this letter for 14 years, holding it like a sacred thing, a promise that had been made and broken by fate rather than by choice. She had spent the rest of her life trying to give me what Rosalind had wanted. A home, a heritage, a place where I could finally belong. I sat on the floor of the tack room for a long time, holding my mother's letter, letting myself grieve for everything we had lost, for the grandmother I never knew, for the mother I barely remembered, for the family that should have been mine. But mixed with the grief was something else, something fierce and bright and absolutely unbreakable. They had loved me, both of them, in their own imperfect ways. They had loved me deeply. And they had left me everything I needed. I was not going to let Victor Ashcroft take that away. Not now, not ever. The next morning I called Sheriff Donovan and told him what I had found. He came to the farm within the hour, still in uniform, and I spread everything on the workbench. The journal entry, the unsigned contract from 8 years ago, the notarized letter from Mr. Waverly, and the signature comparison. My grandmother's real signature, with its telltale mark beside the forgery without one. Sheriff Donovan studied each piece with the careful attention of a man who had been waiting years for exactly this moment. "This is it," he said, looking up at me. "The journal proves she knew he was a fraud. The unsigned contract shows his pattern, and this signature." He held up the comparison. "You can see the mark under the E on every real document she signed. And on his contract, nothing. It's a forgery. Is it enough? It's enough to arrest him. I've been building a case against Victor Ashcroft for 5 years. With this combined with what we have from the Hendersons and the Morrisons, we can finally put him where he belongs." He paused. "And Harriet Sloan. We've suspected her involvement for years. If we can connect her to Ashcroft's operation, the whole network comes down. What do I need to do?" "Sit tight. Call your grandmother's attorney. Have him at the farm on Friday morning. Ashcroft's coming back for your answer in 3 days. We'll be ready." Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I spent them in the barn, working on a new project. Not because I needed to finish it, but because I needed something to do with my hands while my mind raced through everything that could go wrong. Corbin came by every day, sometimes to help with the work, sometimes just to sit with me in the quiet of the workshop. We did not need to talk much during those visits. There was comfort simply in knowing I was not alone. On the second evening, he stood beside me at the workbench as I sanded a piece of maple, his shoulder close to mine. "Whatever happens Friday, you've already won something. You know that, right?" I looked at him. "Your grandmother spent 40 years trying to reach you. Your mother was 3 days away from bringing you home. And you're here now, standing exactly where they both wanted you to be." He smiled. "Ashcroft can't take that away, no matter what happens in court." Thad came by too, every morning. He would stand in the doorway of the workshop with a thermos of coffee and watch me work for a while before he said anything. On the morning of the 3rd day, he handed me the coffee and said, "You've got your grandmother's hands, you know." "What do you mean?" "The way you move around this workshop. The way you look at the wood before you cut it." Elspeth did the same thing, like she was asking the wood's permission. He looked at me steadily. "She'd be proud of you, what you've done here, who you've become." He did not say more than that. He did not need to. On Friday morning, I stood in the kitchen drinking coffee I could not taste, watching the driveway through the window. My grandmother's letter was in my left pocket. My mother's letter was in my right. I had carried them both every day since finding them, like armor made of paper and ink and love. The crunch of tires on gravel came at 9 o'clock sharp. Victor Ashcroft's black Escalade turned into the driveway. But he was not alone. Sheriff Donovan's cruiser was already parked at the end of the road, blocking the exit, and the sheriff himself stood beside it with 2 deputies flanking him. I walked outside on steady legs. Thad was standing on the porch behind me, silent, his weathered hands resting on the porch rail. He did not say anything. He did not need to. His presence was enough. Victor Ashcroft stepped out of his vehicle and froze when he saw the sheriff. His face cycled through confusion, anger, and then something that looked very much like fear. "What is this?" he demanded. I walked toward him, holding the folder my grandmother had prepared for exactly this moment. "This is your contract." I held up the document with his forged signature. "And this is my grandmother's real signature." I held up the image from her video, the one showing the mark under the E. "See the difference? There's a mark under the E on every document she signed for the last 40 years. A secret mark. Your forgery doesn't have it." His face went gray. "That doesn't prove anything. Handwriting varies." "Maybe so, but this does." I pulled out the journal entry. "My grandmother wrote about you 8 years ago. She documented the day you came to her farm and tried to con her into signing a fake contract. She kept the unsigned version. She wrote that you were a fraud and that she would never do business with you. I let that sink in. She knew you'd try again. She prepared for it. She left me everything I needed." Sheriff Donovan stepped forward, his hand resting on the cuffs at his belt. "Victor Ashcroft, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception." As the deputies moved to handcuff him, Ashcroft stared at me with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," he spat, as they pulled his arms behind his back. "You got lucky. That's all this is. Luck." I thought about everything I had survived to get to this moment. The years in the system, the loneliness, the bone-deep belief that I was unwanted and unworthy of love. I thought about my grandmother's 247 letters. I thought about my mother writing, "I want to come home," 3 days before she died. "It wasn't luck," I said quietly, and I meant every word. My grandmother spent years making sure I'd be ready for this, and my mother wanted me here. "You're the one who doesn't belong." They put him in the back of the cruiser. Sheriff Donovan came to stand beside me as the vehicle pulled away. "He's going away for a long time. We've got enough for multiple counts of fraud. The Hendersons and Morrisons have agreed to testify, and we are opening an investigation into Harriet Sloan. The county records show a pattern of suspicious property transactions connected to every family Ashcroft targeted." I stood in the driveway long after the dust had settled back onto the road. Then I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for weeks, maybe my whole life. It was over. The farm was safe. The legacy my grandmother had spent her whole life protecting was safe. I stood there in the spring sunshine, looking out at the fields my great-great-grandfather had cleared, the barn my grandfather had built, the house where my mother had grown up, dreaming of a world beyond these hills. 5 generations of Ridgeways had poured their lives into this soil, and now for the first time, I understood why none of them had ever wanted to leave. Thad walked down from the porch, stopped beside me, did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Your grandmother would be proud of you today, Ren." "Thank you, Thad, for everything." He nodded, cleared his throat, and walked back to his truck without another word. 6 months later, I finished my first commissioned piece of furniture. Not the simple practice table that had held the key, but something far more ambitious. A dining table made of Vermont black walnut, using one of my grandmother's advanced designs that I had studied for weeks before attempting. It took nearly 2 months of work, with many moments when I was certain I had ruined everything. The joinery was complex. The finish had to be perfect to showcase the grain. The whole time I was aware that I was trying to create something worthy of my grandmother's name. But I did it. I built something that would outlast me. The night I finished, half the town came to see it. Thad and Delia were there. Corbin and his father. Sheriff Donovan in his Sunday clothes. Mr. Waverly, who had driven up from Burlington. We gathered around my table for a dinner that Delia spent all day preparing. The first real celebration the farmhouse had seen since my grandmother's death. Elspeth would be so proud, Delia said, running her hand over the smooth surface. She always believed you'd find your way here. I looked around at all the faces that had become my world. Thad, who had helped me understand the land. Delia, who had fed me and mothered me when I did not know I needed it. Sheriff Donovan, who had fought beside me. And Corbin, who had become a steady presence in my life, not rushing anything, just there. A year ago, I had been completely alone, convinced I would never belong anywhere. Now I had more than I had ever dared to dream. 5 years passed. Some things changed, most did not. I ran the farm and the workshop with Corbin at my side. Not as husband and wife right away, just as two people building something together. He learned the craft alongside me, and together we opened our doors to others who needed what we had found. It started with Piper Nash, a 19-year-old girl who had aged out of the foster system the same way I had. She showed up one autumn day, referred by a social worker who had heard our story. She was angry and scared, and absolutely convinced that the world had nothing good for someone like her. I recognized that look instantly. I had worn it myself. I offered her a job, a place to stay, a chance to learn. She was suspicious at first, waiting for the catch. But there was no catch, just opportunity freely given. The same way my grandmother had given it to me. Piper had a gift for furniture design. Within months, she was creating pieces that rivaled my own. Within a year, she was teaching workshops, passing on the skills she had learned. She stopped looking over her shoulder. She stopped waiting for everything to be taken away. She was not the only one. Over the years, a dozen young people came through our doors. Some stayed for a few months before moving on, carrying skills and confidence they had never had. Others became permanent parts of what we were building. All of them left changed. Thad still came by every Saturday morning for coffee. He was 63 now, moving slower, his hair fully gray, but the pale blue eyes were still sharp, and the weathered hands still knew every tool in my grandmother's shop. He had become something to me I did not have a name for. Not a father, not a grandfather, but something in that family of men who show up, who stay, who do not leave when things get hard. Sheriff Donovan retired the year after Ashcroft went to prison. Victor got 12 years for fraud and forgery. Harriet Sloan took a plea deal and lost everything she had built her fraudulent career on. The Hendersons and Morrisons received compensation from the sale of Ashcroft's assets. Not enough to bring back their farms, but enough to say the truth out loud in the courtroom and be believed. 5 years after I inherited the farm, I built something I had been planning in my heart since the day I had been saving a piece of Vermont black walnut, one my grandmother had set aside and labeled for something important.
When I was young, I chased the horizon. A certain peace was waiting there.
I had been waiting until I
felt the
felt
storms were wrong.
I built a memorial bench,
and every
simple in
burden
design,
was
but
unfair.
flawless in execution.
So I spent years fighting the mountains, cursing every winding
On the backrest, I carved an inscription I
never
had
seeing that the struggle was the thing that made me
She built
grow.
with her hands and
The eagle
started.
learns with
I placed the bench
age.
under the old
The
maple
oak
tree
grows
beside
strong
the
beneath the
spot where
snow.
Thad told me
And
my
every
grandmother
soul that's worth becoming
Watching the
must walk where harder paths may
It
go.
faced the land of her demon.
The road was never meant to be easy. The storm was never
On the 5th
meant
anniversary
to
of my
pass.
arrival, I sat in that bench as the sun settled over me. The sky turned orange and pink and deep colors. The same colors I had seen that first evening when Dad drove me off the ground. Everything An orange caddy, who had adopted me somewhere along the way, curled up his side. In my pocket, warm soft. Corbin walked up from the bar, saw them.
I've known loss that left me broken. I've known fear that stole my breath. I've known nights so cold and endless I could barely take one step. Yet every wound became a teacher. Every failure left a mark. And every valley that I walked through placed another star within the dark. The river doesn't fight the canyon. It learns to carve its way ahead. What seems a wall to those who fear it becomes a path.
Your father, your mother, your grandmother, they're looking down at you from somewhere. I did not ask. I did not. We watched the colors fade from watch the stars. Listen to the sound somewhere in the journey. Sawdust becomes a guide. Then the mountain is not in my way. I thought about everything that losing my job. 14 years in a system that could not. The years of believing, and then the letter that I wrote. The journey to the discovery of a legacy I had never known. The grandmother who loved me from afar. The mother who tried to compare. The community. My grandmother holds a gift. She could not. Though hidden from the eye, the obstacle and destination. They had all conspired to keep us apart during the years when I needed her most. But she gave me a future. She gave me a craft that would sustain me for the rest of my life. She gave me proof in letters and dreams. They were sent to shape the man I am. Every trial is part of the journey. That is the greatest gift. The stars came out. Thaddius is my way. The mountain is the reason I can rise. So when the thunder finds me again, I leaned into and dark clouds gather in the sky. I'll greet them like old companions because they belong to the life we had built required constant attention, constant effort, constant love. But for now, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Home.